Hey
I
everybody,
got
welcome
my
back to Keeping
head
It
in
Real
the
with Tiff and Carl.
stars.
I'm Carl Raven,
And I'm Tiff Salcido.
and welcome back to our exploration into and diving into emotional intelligence. Right, it's one of the most important human skills that you can have, relationship skills, right? And so, the last episode we talked about emotional intelligence. We defined emotional intelligence. We talked about some of the attributes and some of the strengths and some of the positives of emotional intelligence, and we spoke and spent some time on self-awareness,
Mhm.
right? Which is really recognizing how emotions affect you and where you are with those and how things land on you emotionally, right? So and not to deny that. So it definitely is an important piece. And the second part, as Tiff mentioned in the last episode, is self-management, right? So
Mhm.
how we are able to take those emotions, recognize those emotions, and recognize how they are affecting us and how we interact with other people, right? And so, just thinking about the feelings and behaviors that we have, sometimes, just being compulsive or impulsive, right? I'm not impulsive as much as I am compulsive, right? If you keep things away
Mhm.
from me, I'm okay. But once I get them, then I can't, I have to, as I've dealt with, my weight my whole life, my best, um, diet things are out of sight, out of mind. If you keep them away from me, I'm good. I don't need to grab something. But if it's in front of me, then yeah, I'm a runaway train, right? So,
Mhm.
that's something that is important to recognize and be able to manage them. This is how I'm feeling. And like you mentioned, right, that space in between. You mentioned, and she mentioned in the last episode, not to use your words, but just talk about, something happens and you react to it. You have a space. That's actually something Viktor Frankl, who was one of the fathers of positive psychology,
Right.
talked about.
Yep.
And he says between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in our space is our power to decide how we are going to respond.
Yeah.
And so it really is a powerful thing to be able to take that pause, like you mentioned yesterday, yeah, the last episode. How am I feeling? How is it affecting me?
Yeah.
What can I do to regain my rational thought? That's the problem. When we're emotional, we're not rational,
Right.
and we get into that amygdala hijack. The amygdala keeps us from accessing our neocortex, our human brain, when we stay emotional. So when you're thinking emotionally, you're not as rational as you think you are, right? And then following through on commitments, saying you're going to do something, following through on those, making sure that we honor those and we don't just slough off, because that you can really lose trust and hurt relationships, especially as leaders. And then adapting to circumstances, right? Which is easier for some of us than others, right? Some of us like to be able to go with the flow, and other people, we want to know what to expect at every moment. We want to have our itinerary of the day, and we wake up
Mhm.
and we're making sure that happens. So, those are just some of the things that we deal with when it comes to the idea of what it means to manage our own emotions. So, you know, think about how do those land on you, Tiff, or what are some of the things that you think about when it comes to self-management?
Well, for me, self-management is just this idea that you are being intentional about how you respond to something. Um, it's what turns like your awareness into leadership and like being in that space where you are aware enough to not have to apologize later. I don't know how else to put it. As someone, I'm not I'm reactive. I am very reactive, and the my biggest life problem is that I've got a smart mouth and a quick wit, and so, um, you know, I have had a history of saying what's on my mind, but it's not necessarily helpful. Um, when I think about self-regulation and self-management, I'm thinking about how do I regulate my emotions? How do I control my reactions? How do I choose my behavior? And that's not necessarily challenging for me when things are going well. Where it becomes challenging for me is when I'm under pressure. And so that's part of that hijack, right? And it's not just tied to, I just want to make sure this is super clear here. it's not just tied to negative emotions. A lot of times when we're thinking about regulating our emotions, we might be thinking about regulating our anger, frustration, irritation, etc. But I think it's just as important to regulate some of your joyful moments as well, because sometimes in that space of joy, optimism, excitement, you also make decisions or you say things that are not necessarily the right thing to do either. I can tell you as an example, anytime I go on vacation, my joy is saying, quit your job, fake your death, and just live here for the rest of your life. And that's not, again, it's a positive thing. I'm optimistic about it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right idea. I'm reacting to my feeling of peace. I'm reacting to my feeling of relaxation and awe and wonder versus reacting to my reality, which is I have to work for a living because my parents didn't leave me a trust fund, unfortunately. So it's not about a feeling. You have to feel your emotions. The self-regulation is just like not reacting in that space of autopilot. Um because again, people don't experience your intentions, they experience what your reaction is. So you snap at a meeting, people are going to notice that. If you shut down when you're in the middle of a conflict, people notice that. When you send the email, you know what the email is, where you CC everybody and their mama. People notice that. If you are avoiding having tough conversations or avoiding accountability because you feel embarrassed or shame or vulnerability or whatever it is, people notice that. So, when I think about emotional regulation, especially in the workplace, one unmanaged reaction, one like moment of letting it all out can undo months and years of trust and deteriorate relationships all in one fell swoop. You can have done it right 100 times, and that one time you get it wrong, it just undoes everything. And so I think that this is important, especially in human services, because it's high stress. Remember, we're dealing with crisis and trauma. People, like, there are real world ramifications of the choices that we make. And it's not subtle. It's not like, oh, the company might lose money or we might have a bad quarter. Like, it's real world. People might go hungry. Kids may not have food or water or shelter or healthcare, right? Those are real things. It's also important because we do work in such emotional environments, like we're absorbing a lot of the trauma of other people. And this is not to say that we're immune to trauma in our own lives. Just because you work for a government agency doesn't mean you have your shit together. Let's just be honest. You know, there are people who work in human services that are still dealing with homelessness, that are still dealing with food insecurity, that are still dealing with domestic abuse or mental health challenges or substance abuse. Like, all of these things are not, you're not immune from them when you start working on the other side of the desk. So, um, we absorb a lot of the trauma and sometimes are re traumatized by other people's experiences that we can relate to. And there's always this sense of constant urgency. And it's like we're never doing enough. There's never a moment where we like, oh man, I'm all caught up. What do I do for the rest of the day? Everything is urgent. Everything is crisis. Everything has to be done now. So all of this like combined in this environment, um, it does wear people out. And I kind of like give the example of, like you can always tell in a county or a government agency when people are brand new because they're like sparkly and glitterific, right? They're so happy to be there and they can't wait to help and they're gonna change the world and superhero mode. And I freaking love that energy is so addicting to me. I love to see someone who is in that space and then all of the seasoned people, and I always say the seasoning is salt because 'cause they're all salty. They have not been able to regulate their emotion, and so they numb it. And so instead of being like, "Oh my god, I love your positivity, I love your energy," they're like, "Come here, little one. Let me teach you how we really do it around here. Let me show you, like, the real way because you're gonna burn yourself out being so helpful." And I think a lot of that is because the emotional regulation is not taught as a skill set that people can't recognize when they're going from that enthusiastic, can't wait to help, I'm going to change the world, to I've resigned myself to this constant bureaucracy and I stop seeing people as people and start seeing them as numbers, they can't know, they don't have that self-awareness, which means that they can't regulate it, right? I can't know, I'm not noticing that I'm burnt out or that I'm feeling disconnected, so I can't regulate that I'm disconnected and burnt out. So self-management is where you have to really, again, self-awareness and self-management go together. This is where you have the most control, because if you can know what your triggers are, or know like what are the things that create that emotional moment for you, then you know what sets you off and you know how to manage it. And so if I know, like I'll tell you, for example, there is one email that comes up in my box, like it just the email pops up. I don't even know what the email says yet, and I already know I'm irritated. Like immediately. Immediately, I know it's about to be some shenanigans. So I know that it's a trigger for me. And so I try to not um open that email until I'm in a space where I can like process for a few minutes before I have to like be face to face with another human being. Because I already know my first read is going to be like, what the now, right? Uh I don't want to have that energy that I carry on to other people. And so again, I'm gonna wait because I know it's a trigger. That's what emotional regulation is. Um, I'm not going to have a hard conversation with my spouse right before I have to go to work, right? I'm not going to, you know, talk to, I'm trying not to shout out like people in my family, but there's like certain names that come up on my phone and I'm like, maybe now's not a good time, but maybe in another time when I have some more space, like that's what regulation is. It's the knowing like what your response is and choosing to do something better with it. And that requires, by the way, setting boundaries, right? Setting boundaries. Unmute yourself, Carl. There you go.
There's that old quote, feel the fear and do it anyway, right? And sure, that's great. But if we aren't aware of what the fear is doing to us and how it's affecting our emotional state, our which in our emotional state, like you mentioned, it affects our communication, it affects our decision making, it affects the way that other people receive us, right? If you are one of those people who people say, "Oh, I know what to stay away from you this morning," right?
Mm-hmm.
That's because your emotions are a lot more prevalent than you think, right? You
Right.
know, a lot of us think we're good at letting things go. We are not as good at letting things go as we think we are. We can maybe let things,
Definitely.
if it's interacting with somebody, we can maybe go back to equilibrium until we see them again.
Right.
And the next time we see them, oh, hi, I don't like them, right? Or we can know we're going to interact with them and we're going to prepare, for what they're going to say or what they're going to do. And when I mean prepare, it's like we put on our armor and we're ready to be defensive and we're ready to not give them the benefit of the doubt that what they're saying, hey, good morning. Oh, well, what are you talking about? What's wrong with you? Right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, oh, they're actually saying good morning. So we don't let things go as well. And just thinking about those things that are triggers, those pet peeves.
Yeah.
How easy is it to get into an emotional state when one of those pet peeves are triggered? And
Mm-hmm.
it's a natural part of our brain. It's a natural state in our brain that we experience stimuli and then we have an emotional response. And if we are not regulating that and are regulating ourselves, then it will manifest itself in unproductive ways. And you won't even know it, right? Sometimes you think you are just keeping things to yourself and other people can see the stress responses
Mm-hmm.
that you have, right? Just even in not even in negative stuff. I mean, like you've always said, we all have our favorite kids, don't lie, right? So, um,
Hey, Jay.
right. So how much do we look forward to seeing them, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to maybe other parts of our family. Clients. Do we have
Yeah.
clients that we look forward to interacting with, as opposed to those that we know are going to be challenging? So we
Right.
prepare for those interactions. And if we're not preparing to steel ourselves to recognize, okay, these are my emotional triggers, and when they are going to trigger them, I can give somebody the benefit of the doubt just because they're such a nice person and they're so sweet. When maybe the last thing that I should do is give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Or I won't give somebody the benefit of the doubt if we've had a negative response or first impressions, right? That our brain goes on first impressions. Tiff, you ever have anybody say this? Says, "Oh, when I first met you, I didn't like you."
I've never had anybody say that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so Tiff is being
That's not
very
true.
emotionally regulated right now at this moment, right? But
You know what? But no, actually, I will tell you, one person has told me that. Most people find me delightful when they first meet me because I am. But I did have one person, and we're like best friends now. I have
yeah,
one person that did say, I didn't like you when I first met you because I thought you were fake. And I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, because you were just so happy all of the time. And I just was like, there's no way that that's real. And then I got to know you, and I'm like, oh, that's just how you are. And I said, that's freaking right. That's freaking right. So yeah, no, Carl, I don't get that feedback. People usually love me when they first meet me. Sorry.
cool, no problem. So, but then also even just in the regular way we do business, right? Me
Right.
as a trainer, right? I am inherently naturally an introvert,
Mhm.
right? And what that means is I like interacting with people, but then I need time to myself and recharge my battery because y'all wear me out, right?
Yeah.
And it's not anything to you. It's not about you. It's about me and how I respond
Right.
to things.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
when I'm teaching, it's very easy for me, especially if it's a newer group that I don't know. It's very easy for me to get anxiety and to build up all these what if this can go wrong? What if that goes wrong? What if I stumble on my words, which will happen when I'm stressed out? And so I prepare. I prepare the night before. I if it's a new venue, I get there a little extra early, and I want to make sure that the tables are in the right place, that everything is there, that my internet works. And so I am hyper sensitive to the idea of how do I prepare so that my emotions don't get the best of
Hmm.
me when I'm interacting. So I'll do some breathing. I have some, affirmations I tell myself. You've done this class many times before to many new people. You'll be fine. They're going to like you, right? They generally always do, right? So just
Hmm.
to be able to build myself up and, to have that. I also have an opening. My old boss used to call it a spiel, so I call it a spiel, but I have this opening presentation that I do when I'm interacting with folks and I haven't met them, and I let them know who I am and how long I've been with, the organization I've been with and my background and my experience. And then if it's a full day class, they might get a terrible joke, and I might talk about when the first time I got a senior discount put on my bill and all these other things like that, just so that we warm up the situation. But that's also me being a relationship focused person. I want to warm up the situation because it makes it easier for me to be able to move forward and connect with you. And so I have to prepare for that. So that's self management as well. How do I prepare myself for interviews, for presentations, for podcasts, for classes, for a conversation I want to have with my wife that, you know, isn't, just what's wrong with the house, but hey, so you're talking about wanting to go see Chris Brown and Usher, right? So when are you starting your second job? I'm just kidding, right? So, but just to be able to prepare to have
Right.
those conversations, and we've used models. I talk about CBIA plus F, which is, that model where content, behavior, impact, and action, and then feedback. I
Hmm.
have that on the front of my, in front of, wherever I am in a laminated card that just reminds me that that's where I want to be and where am I at in that conversation, especially if it's a crucial conversation, because not every crucial conversation needs to be difficult, but our
Right.
brain will make us feel like it's difficult if we're not prepared to manage our emotions in those situations.
Right. Right. So there's a lot like to get there. So I teach a course, a series on emerging leadership, and we do it through the lens of emotional intelligence. And so we spend a whole day on self-awareness. We do that like through the disc lens. So we learn about our disc style and everybody else's and how we interact. And then we have a class on communication where we really focus on like again self-awareness around like our perceptual filters and the psychological noise that happens in conversations. We spend some time talking about like the crucial conversations model, like how do you get prepared for those, whatever format you use, like those challenging conversations that could be emotionally triggering or high stakes or whatever the case may be. And then we spend some time talking about teams. This is where the relationships and the empathy conversation comes in. And then we talk about change and how to deal with change. And again, the emotional part of change, whether it be organizational change or whatever. So yesterday was the final day with this cohort, and we were really digging deep into this idea of emotional intelligence and why in leadership it's such an important skill set. And one of my favorite students in the class, will leave his name out there, but he was fab the whole series. He was funny and articulate and involved. I just really appreciated him. I appreciated everybody else, but he definitely stood out to me. Um, he said, like, again, I think half silly but half for real in the chat. So what you're saying is that we've got to do work on ourselves. That we've got to be healthy and whole to be able to be good leaders. And I said, sorry to break it to you, but yeah, you do have to be healthy and whole to be a good leader. And I think that that's uh something that maybe we don't talk enough about. Um, that it's difficult to be an effective leader without the emotional intelligence because we are too human. And I want us to be human. Like there's nothing wrong, like we're not robots, we are human and we need to be human. But emotional intelligence is managing your humanity, and it's difficult to do when you are perpetually stressed, overwhelmed, frustrated. Your brain just doesn't work well when you're in that constant state of stress. That's where, again, to preserve energy, you just get into reactivity and then later on are defensive about the way that you reacted. That's the opposite of emotional intelligence. So it's not about avoiding discomfort. Emotional intelligence is not, again, about being sunshine and rainbows all of the time, because that's not real. That's not realistic. But where you really are the best human, the best version of humanity is where you can say, I'm feeling really overwhelmed and frustrated right now. And I need a few minutes to think about what I want to say next because you're important to me. Like, people are not going to be like, oh, how dare them be frustrated? How dare them feel overwhelmed? Who do they think they are? They're supposed to be in charge here. If nothing else, people oftentimes connect with that. They're thinking, well, I'm feeling the same way. Wow, I really appreciate that they're not chewing our faces off right now, but instead are going to take a few minutes to think about what they're going to say. I think that's maybe something I could practice. And whether that's happening on a conscious or unconscious level, when we have leadership who can be human and acknowledge that things are not always hunky dory, or there's realness in the feeling, and still say, I'm feeling this and I want to do the right thing. I think that's what really creates the culture and the tone where we can be emotionally intelligent with people. And one other point that I want to just throw out here really quickly, because this also came up in a class I was doing last week, um, is this idea that, like, what we think and what's in our mindset, which is again part of self-awareness, is knowing what your mindset is it dictates our behavior. So like having self-awareness of your mindset will dictate your behavior if you practice self-management. So the example I want to give here is there was language like, oh, supervision is like babysitting. And it's like I have a bunch of high school kids, and like infantilizing the workers. And my question was, well, do you all participate in child labor? Because as far as I know, that's against the law. So do you all hire children to work here? And they're like, no, we don't hire children. We work with adults. Perfect. So your first like awareness is that you are referring to them as children. How do you think that impacts the way that you respond? Because you're not supervising, you're trying to parent adults. And one of the people was like, holy crap, yeah, right? That awareness moment came on, which is going to now shift the regulation of now how he engages with the people that he supervises, because he's going to be aware that they're not children, they're adults. How am I treating them like children or parenting them? Or where can I ask adults to be adults because they are adults? that
Yeah.
that to me is the regulation piece of it.
Yeah. Who as an adult that has responsibilities and pays their own, mortgage and, and car payments and tuition payments want to be told that their manager has to babysit them.
Right.
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 And you see that just even having that conversation of that idea of um well, I have an open door policy. I don't understand why people don't come into my open door, right? A lot of that is because people are reticent and hesitant. It's just the idea of self-management. So if I ask for help, right? What is my pet peeve? I hate when people aren't accountable. I hate when people are so needy. What does society say about needy people? Right? That you have to babysit, you have to, oh, do I have to tell you this? Right? People are so afraid of judgment. Right. Oh, well, you didn't remember this. We went through the same SAWS training that you did, right? Or you've been here longer than us. You should know these things, right? And so, it keeps people from wanting to engage with people to ask for assistance that can really make a difference in the success of their practice. And so if that's where you are and you're not recognizing that, okay, well, I'm feeling this, what is it that I'm afraid of? That self-awareness, and how does it affect me when I'm interacting with folks? So, just an example. I don't know about you, Tiff, but when I first started, and I'm still working on this, right? I have to edit. I'm still working on self-editing with my classes because
Mhm.
I will have tons of content and I'll have 12 hours of content for a 6 hour class. And I used to want to get through it all the time. I looked at my very first class I did for UC Davis was in Alameda County in 2007, and I still have the handout, and it's 52 pages, no PowerPoint, just 52 pages. And, and I'm just showing them all this cool stuff that I knew and that I learned from UC Davis, but then also through my practice. And we went through a million miles an hour. And I had some activities, but most of it was me up on the stage doing my thing. Right? We don't have a stage, we just have the front, of the room with the PowerPoint. But for me, I was on
Mhm.
stage. I had to justify me being there because there was people there that had more experience than me. But yet I'm here. I'm 30, what, 30 some odd years old, right? At the time, 32,
Yeah.
33, 34. And here I am, training all these people. And then I get a supervisor class that I have to fill in for. And I'd been a supervisor, but I spent a year as a supervisor at the time. And some of these people had been in the class 15, 20 years as a supervisor.
Yeah.
And so my idea of, how am I regulating my emotions of intimidation or trying to justify myself and that I'm in the right place? And so I overload my content. I put too much stuff in there
Yeah.
and it doesn't it doesn't flow. And I look back and people have always said that was my class, but I look back at those PowerPoints and those slides and the hundred slide deck for a 6 hour class, right? And it's just like that's a little excessive. And it's funny because people that I've looked to as mentors, people that are professors. I have a
Hmm.
good friend, Chris Sablinski, who's a professor at University Pacific, and he's a part-time comedian. Tiff. So that's somebody
I
I'm
love that.
so, Chris, if you're paying attention, we need you on the next podcast. But
Mm.
we had that conversation when I was kind of working as his assistant, as coordinator for a class he was teaching. He goes, I always feel like I have too much stuff, and then when I go back, I'm like, why did I have all this stuff packed into it? It could have been a larger class. It could have been two classes, right? And so it's constantly self-editing. But why are we self-editing? Because we're afraid we're going to run out of stuff, and if we run out of stuff, what are we going to say? Right.
Right.
And so what do we do? And so I was observing a class last week where, the class was so quiet that the presenters ran out of content an hour and a half
Oh,
before the
shoot.
end of the class. Yeah. So they had to think on the fly what they were going to do. And one of the, she was, oh my God, what are we going to do? And the other presenter was like, we're good. We got it. I can always add stuff. There's always enough to talk about with this topic. There's a video we can show. We can have that conversation. So she was really good on the fly. The other person was like, oh my God, what are we get panic?
Mhm.
And so it was, and she was regulated enough to where it didn't necessarily sound super scary for people who, may not know her or have that experience as an instructor, but it really showed up in what she said and how she manifested itself. So yeah, managing our emotions and just thinking about how we can control those. So I know you had some tips in the last episode about our self-awareness. What about self-management? What are some hot tips you got?
I stay with the hot tips. That's kind of my thing. So, one of the first things that I would say in it as a hot tip is going back to knowing what your triggers are, right? Know what are the things that set you off. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, what are my triggers? Is it being challenged? Is it feeling ignored? Is it feeling disrespected? Is it when I'm under a time pressure? You cannot manage what you don't notice. And so I would really encourage you to like pay attention to in those moments where maybe you're not regulating well, like what preceded that? What was it that caused the reaction? And just pay attention to that. Because if you can notice it, then you can manage it better next time, right? It took me a while to realize the name on the email would make my mood shift. So now that I've noticed that, I try to be more aware of that when again I'm choosing what to consume. The next little tip I would have is the same as our last episode, which is practice the pause, friends. Practice the pause. Like don't be afraid to say, I need to think about that for a minute. You know what? I want to be thoughtful about what my response is. So can you give me a half hour to think about this? What that looks like for you is really going to be important. And how you do it is again up to you. If you need a lot of time, a little bit of time. I want to show you one quick trick that I learned. Go ahead, Carl. Ask me really quick a question that might throw me off. I'm not going to answer it, but just ask me a question that I might need to be thoughtful about.
What's the square root of pi?
Hmm. Well, let me think about that for a second. I have no idea. I'm terrible at math. All right, but you see that little sip of water I took right there?
Yeah.
Okay. So the this is like a great way. And if I had I like I love if you have ever seen me in person, I always have a beverage, whether it be coffee or water or something. I always have, and it's not because I'm inherently thirsty, but I sometimes you're in front of people. When you're presenting, you're in front of a group of people. Sometimes people ask you a tough question. I'll be like, "Huh." It gives me enough time to sit there and process, like, what do I want to say? How do I want to say it? It's 2 to 3 seconds, and nobody's ever mad at you for taking a sip of water. So if you don't feel confident enough to say, I need a couple of minutes to think about that, then have a beverage. And if you have a water bottle where you have to take the lid off, take a drink, and put it back on, it gives you that little space to just think about what your next thing is without like feeling like there's awkward silence. And so stay hydrated. That's my second hot tip. But practice that pause. Um, my last one here in thinking about like what that practice is, um you don't necessarily need more time, you just need like a moment. But this is the third one, is choose what you want your response to be intentionally. So you might have to ask yourself some questions like, what outcome do I want here? What's going to move us forward? What am I not going to have to defend later on? Like just really paying attention to like what you want. And here's where I'm gonna like challenge people, especially working in government, because we're in such compliance based systems. A lot of times what people want is to be right. Right, what I want is to be right, to save face, to be the one in the know. And I'm going to challenge you to go a little bit deeper than that. Like, why do you need to be right? Why do you need to be in the no? Why do you have to be the one? So think about that. And I normally only have three takeaways, but I feel like there's a bonus one here. This is a bonus hot tip, burning hot tip. And that is, when you miss the mark, like repair it right away. So, um, you are a human, and I want to just acknowledge all of our humanity. Even if we're intentional, we don't always get it right. When you notice that maybe you responded in a way that wasn't the best, then make that right as quickly as you can. It's not about being perfect. It's not about perfection. It's about recovering. And so if I Mm, and I do this at home with my spouse because my intention at home is I married this person and I want to love him our whole life. And so we don't want to waste days being mad at each other. That's like something intentional that we practice in our marriage, that we want to spend our time loving each other and not being mad. So being that we are human beings, there are times where maybe he asks me a question and I'm like, and as soon as the kitty's out there scratching, I'm repairing that right away. And I might say something like, you know what, that came out sassier than I intended. So sorry about that. What I wanted to say is, you know, hopefully you can forgive me because you didn't deserve that. And sometimes he's like, cool. And other times it takes him a little bit of time to process that. But no matter what, if you do get it wrong and you're a human being and you have that moment of reaction, like don't beat yourself up about it, but just do your best to make it right as quickly as you can. And most people don't wait for them to come to you. Like you have to be proactive to say, I wish I would have handled that better. It came out sharper than what I intended. Can I try again? Or I don't feel good about the way that I handled that because you deserve my respect. And so here's how I want to make it right. So I think that's part of that self-regulation as well. It's just really knowing that you don't have to be perfect. You do have to be consistent. And that again takes a lot of vulnerability, which will
Yeah,
lead us to all of the other stuff that we're going to talk about next.
yeah, absolutely. And as we've talked about, trust is based off of consistency and integrity, right? So you being vulnerable, you letting people in to how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and let people know what's going on is some of the most trustworthy and trust building activities you can do. So, all right. Well, thank you all. Thank you for joining us today. And we really appreciate you all. And we will see you in our next episode when we get to the third part of emotional intelligence, which would be social awareness and then relationship management. So until then, I'm Carl,
And Tiff,
and keep it real.
keep it real.